The climax of A Dance with Dragons doesn't actually happen within A Dance with Dragons. Despite being such a massive novel, George R. R. Martin was forced to cut a sizable amount of material and relegate it to the sixth novel of the series, the yet unreleased Winds of Winter. Among these relocated chapters, four massive battles are housed. These conflicts span every corner of the world of Ice and Fire, including a city under siege from slavers, a pretender king's quest to reclaim the throne of Westeros, and a ritualistic blood magic sacrifice intended to wake leviathans from the deep. Despite all of these other climactic events, one battle remains the most anticipated at the end of Dance. It was built up to over a massive portion of the novel, with most of Theon's and Asha's point of view chapters devoted to its build-up, as well as a sizable portion of Jon's. That, of course, is the Battle of Ice, the one true king, Stannis Baratheon's march on Winterfell. Today I'm going to be covering a prominent theory as to what exactly will happen at the Battle of Ice. This isn't my theory originally, though I do have some elements to add on to it, which I'll clarify when they come up. The original blog post in which this theory is detailed is linked in the description. This video is intended as a summary and explainer of sorts, as it'll hopefully take you less time to watch this than read the over 11,000 words that this writer added to this theory. So it's very good, very detailed. I highly encourage you to read it after you finish this video if you want more information on anything I talk about here. And overall, I think it's a fantastic theory that I personally buy into in many regards. So, without further ado, let's discuss the Night Lamp theory. To begin, let's survey both of the combatants in this upcoming battle, as well as the terrain on which this conflict will take place. Stannis' story throughout Dance builds towards his march on Winterfell, as he hopes to liberate both the castle and the north as a whole from the Boltons and their tyranny. Unfortunately, as the Starks have told us many times, winter is coming. Stannis' forces are slowed by snow and ice until eventually their progress is entirely halted by a massive blizzard. We see this predicament in an Asha chapter entitled The Sacrifice. Stannis' army is snowed into a small town known as the Crofters Village, unable to progress or to retreat. This is a pretty small town with long, low buildings sandwiched between two lakes, both of which are frozen over. These lakes also house several small islands, the largest of which contains an ancient, still-living weirwood tree. The most notable feature of this village itself is its watchtower, which burns with a beacon fire at all hours of the day and of the night. Now that we know where they're situated, let's take a look at the Baratheon forces. Stannis left the wall with over 1,500 of his own men, and 3,000 Northmen have joined him along his march southward. These Northmen are mostly mountain clans, which Jon Snow suggested that Stannis pursue as allies. Stannis also has 64 horses, which is down from 800 at the start of the march. The weather has prevented Stannis from obtaining more supplies, so he's been forced to eat the horses. Additionally, Stannis has 450 Karstark men, though these men are planning on betraying the one true king's cause. We do see the discovery of this betrayal in the Theon sample chapter of the Winds of Winter, so these troops won't be betraying Stannis mid-battle, luckily for him. It's also great to note that Stannis has, well, Stannis. He's likely the most experienced and talented battle commander on the continent of Westeros, and he has a vast wealth of experience to aid him in any tactical combat, and a lot of that experience will pertain to this specific battle. With the Baratheon forces established, let's take stock of his opposition. The Boltons have a massive tactical advantage, being inside the walls of Winterfell. However, mounting tension between the lords within the castle motivated Roose Bolton to take drastic action. The Frey forces and the Manderly forces are expelled from the castle late in Dance, charged with destroying the Manus' army before it arrives at the walls of Winterfell. As observed by Theon at Moat Cailin, the Frey forces number greater than 1,400 soldiers. The Manderlys are a considerably smaller force, numbering only about 300. However, similarly to the Karstarks, the loyalty of the Manderly forces may not be what they seem. Wyman Manderly despises the Freys, and makes no secret of this during Davos' final chapter in Dance. Wyman swears loyalty to Stannis if Davos is able to retrieve Rickon Stark from Skagos. So it seems quite likely that the Manderly forces will turn on the Freys as soon as they can, perhaps at some point during the Battle of Ice. It's also good to note that Wyman himself is not the commander of the Manderly army at this point. He took an injury late in Dance. He was slashed through the throat, though he does seem to still be alive and writing the pink letter, as I talked about in another video. But yeah, he's not the one leading these forces. It seems to be other lesser lords or sons of his who are leading the Manderly troops into the Battle of Ice. The Frey commanders are not nearly as gifted as the one true king. The leader of this army is Hosteen Frey, though its original commander was Aenys Frey, who was killed during the collapse of some of Winterfell's architecture. Aenys was the clever one, Hosteen not so much. Hosteen is noted to be quite angry and generally pretty hasty, and both of these traits are less than advantageous in a general sense. Stannis knows about these tendencies, and they seem to be playing into exactly what he's planning. To quote from the Theon sample chapter from Winds, Aenys broke his neck, I heard, but Sir Hosteen only lost a horse. He will be angry now. Strangely, Stannis smiled. Angry foes do not concern me. Anger makes men stupid, and Hosteen Frey was stupid to begin with, if half of what I've heard of him is true. Let him come. So what exactly is Stannis' plan? It was laid out directly in a Davos chapter earlier in Dance, or so the theory goes. Stannis served as Master of Ships in King's Landing during his brother's reign. During this time, he and Davos encountered a strategy employed by pirates off the shores of 3 islands called the Three Sisters. The shores of these islands would be lit by beacon fires, marking safe shores on which sailors would be able to dock their ships with impunity. Pirates would extinguish these beacon fires and set up similar fires in hazardous locations. This would wreck the sailing ships, leaving them free to be attacked and plundered by pirates. Stannis directly knew of this, as he threatened to punish one of his men if this same thing should ever happen again. You may have picked up as to how this will play into Stannis' plans for the Battle of Ice. The beacon fire on the watchtower is far and away the most visible portion of the Crofters Village. What's more, the blizzard makes the entire terrain a whiteout, as stated in Asha's last point of view chapter, The Sacrifice. Stannis may extinguish this beacon atop the tower and light another beacon in a far more hazardous location. In this same Asha chapter, she notes that Stannis' men have been digging fishing holes in the ice, burrowing through the lake in order to attain more food. She even thinks that it's a wonder that more men haven't fallen through. The islands on this lake would make an opportune location for a false beacon, as luring the Freys onto the ice could destroy their forces in an instant, with soldiers breaking through the ice and sinking into the lake to drown. Hosteen Frey knows that the village is on a small land bridge between 2 lakes, and moving the beacon fire would shift his idea as to where that land bridge is located. This is where Stannis being happy about Hosteen's rage comes into play. An angry foe is a stupid foe, and this makes Hosteen far more likely to rush towards the beacon fire, throwing caution to the wind. In that same conversation with Theon, Stannis states that he means to turn the very ground to his advantage, which could be referring to the ways in which the ice could be broken and the lake could be used as a weapon against the Freys. What's more, the mountain clansmen may be able to act as skirmishers, initially engaging the Frey forces and leading them in a chase onto the ice. Stannis may also want a way to break the ice, and not in a conversational sense. He already has the fishing holes and will likely dig more of those, but this theory posits that he could make a catapult from the materials of the Crofters Village. The watchtower is made of stones, which could be used as ammunition, and there's a large amount of woods from both the trees around the village and the cabins themselves. If a catapult was made, it could be fired onto the ice, breaking it and finishing off the Frey forces in a single blow. However, Stannis would need a way to signal his armies, and even potentially to put the Freys on the back foot. Luckily, Stannis has a perfect signal for those functions on his belt. Stannis' sword Lightbringer could act as a signal to his army, and as a way to blind the Freys. He's had this sword since we've met him in A Clash of Kings, however we've only seen it emit the amount of light necessary for such a signal at one point in the story so far. This was at the sacrifice of Mance Rayder early on in Dance. The Theon sample chapter indicates that Stannis may be planning a similar sacrifice for the Battle of Ice, perhaps to fuel his sword as a beacon for the troops. The chapter ends with Asha and Stannis discussing what the king plans to do with Theon. Stannis states that he cannot spare the lives of Turncloaks, and that Theon will be burned alive. Asha asks Stannis to do the deed himself, with a sword before a weirwood tree, as Ned Stark would have done. However, it seems fairly likely that Stannis does not plan on executing Theon at all. The next part isn't the original theory, and is a bit of a theory of my own as to the execution itself. While Mance was supposedly sacrificed at the beginning of A Dance with Dragons, it wasn't actually Mance. It was a glamour. It was a guy named Rattleshirt who was essentially magically disguised to look like Mance and to be burned in Mance's place, because Mance was too useful to Melisandre and potentially to Stannis. Stannis may or may not have had knowledge of this fake-out at the time it occurred. However, it does seem quite likely that he does have that knowledge now. He's been said to spend long hours staring into the flame in this tower in the Crofters Village, and it has been speculated that this is a form of communication with Melisandre. What's more, Theon is an incredibly valuable prisoner. Keeping him alive ensures that Stannis has power over at least some of the Ironborn, and holds the key to invalidating the King's Moot that placed Euron Greyjoy on the Seastone chair. Theon is debatably even more important to Stannis' cause than Mance would be, and sparing him would make the most sense for his pragmatic character and for the story as a whole. However, the Northmen need to see Theon burn, so likely someone, cloaked and bound, will be burned on the island in a fate mirroring Mance Rayder, just without the glamour, still disguised by a cloak or some sort of physical disguise. It seems as though this replacement sacrifice may have already been revealed to us. In the Theon sample chapter, Maester Tybalt is unveiled to be a traitor, working for the Boltons. Stannis forces this information out of him and then confines him to a hut, specifically until the king decides what to be done with him. If Maester Tybalt is the sacrifice of the weirwood, Stannis would still be burning a turncloak, which may help with his internal sense of justice and that kind of delusion that he needs to keep up in order to keep going. We know from the false sacrifice of Mance Rayder, the King's Blood is not necessary in order to power up Lightbringer, though the perception of King's Blood may add to this illusion. Theon would have King's Blood through his father, Balon Greyjoy, so it would very much provide this perception if the Northmen believed that it was Theon being burned. So Stannis could wrap this maester in a cloak and burn him at the weirwood tree in order to power up his magic sword. So, to recap the theory, Stannis will lure the Frey forces onto an icy lake via a false beacon fire. The Freys are led by an unwise, angry commander who will likely charge directly into Stannis' trap without thinking first. He will then ignite his sword with a sacrifice, either of Theon or more likely of Maester Tybalt, signaling an attack to his troops and blinding the Freys with this massive surge of light. Holes in the ice combined with a catapult fire will break it, sending the Freys to their icy and watery doom. Additionally, there could be other elements of this theory, most notably that Stannis' forces could be waiting in the actual Crofters Village to come around, and seize the baggage train of the Freys, as they are currently starving and out of supplies, and gaining these new rations and horses and everything that the baggage train would entail could greatly aid Stannis' cause and his continued march on Winterfell after this battle in the ice. One last portion of this theory exists, and it's a piece that I created on my own. It turns out we've already seen the first page of the Battle of Ice, and it comes from quite the unusual source. Fans have grown increasingly desperate over the intervening dozen years since Dance's release, and any information is a welcome surprise. One such surprise came through an episode of Last Week Tonight with John Oliver in 2014. George Martin made a quick guest appearance as a joke where he's typing at his computer, if you can call it that, writing The Winds of Winter. A Song of Ice and Fire fans, as healthy and well-adjusted as we are, were able to analyze this brief snippet of text on Martin's screen and identified it as the beginning of an Asha Greyjoy chapter at the Battle of Ice. A number of interesting details come out of this passage. Firstly, the Frey's leadership situation seems to be even worse than we anticipated. They're being led by Hosteen, yes, as expected, but also by Big Walder Frey. Big Walder is a 9-year-old boy, and bringing him into battle as a leader does not seem to be a great sign for the strategic capabilities of the Frey army. However, that being said, Big Walder is pretty conniving for a 9-year-old, so maybe he'll do better than his big cousin Hosteen Frey. He might also be an uncle or grandfather or something. The Frey family tree is something that is very complicated and might need its own video. Hint, hint. Asha being in the middle of the Battle of Ice could be a bad sign for her survival as a whole. It's unlikely to be a very safe place to be in the middle of any battle, and Martin does pretty desperately need to cull the herd of point-of-view characters. Given the fact that both Greyjoys are out on the ice for this battle, or likely in Theon's case, it does seem quite possible that one of them will not walk away. And I think that if it is one of them, it's more likely to be Asha, as Theon is a pretty crucial character overall. The other pertinent detail from this passage is its very last line. After describing the banners under which the Freys are marching, the final words of the fragment are quoted as follows: "They rushed together like." It's unclear exactly what is rushing together here, or what is being rushed towards. Is it the Frey army rushing into the trap? Is it the Frey army and Stannis' army rushing together? The latter has always seemed more likely to me based on this snippet of text, which does seem to directly contradict the thesis of the Night Lamp theory. Given the theory, Stannis' forces would never directly clash with the Freys. They'd be safely positioned on the islands or outside of them in order to lure these forces into a trap. However, given the vague nature of these final words, it's quite unlikely that we'll know either way until Winds is eventually and finally published. My personal belief is that Stannis' plans will remain as stated in the Night Lamp, but the mountain clans will disobey and rush in. This would decrease Stannis' forces rather drastically, leaving the battle as more of a mixed result, as Martin tends to like to do. Additionally, it's mentioned several times that these clans are undisciplined, and that may result in them breaking formation and thus the ice. So, this is the Night Lamp theory. What do you think of it? Do you think it's very likely to happen? What do you think is going to happen to Stannis in the Winds of Winter as a whole? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. While you're down there, be sure to like and subscribe. I'm very near 10,000 subscribers, and I really appreciate any help in getting there, as it's a huge milestone that I'd love to reach. I really love talking about Stannis, and there is definitely more I could do on him. There are other parts to this theory that I could cover that cover the aftermath of the Battle of Ice. If anybody's interested in that, be sure to let me know in the comments as well. And I'd love to hear what other topics you'd want to hear me talk about as well. Next week's video is already determined. I'm doing a collaboration with another A Song of Ice and Fire YouTuber, and I'm very much looking forward to it. It should be a fun pair of videos. So I hope you all will look forward to that. I will talk to you all soon, and I hope you all have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. I just said that, but goodbye.